here we are at a Cargill corn processing plant in Iowa, where we're on an existing trapezoidal standing seam metal roof. And they are applying the Tritoflex and Tritocryl 2K liquid recover system over this existing metal roof. The options they had were to install a single-ply overlay, which would have required to put thousands and thousands of holes through this roof to hold that down. As you can see right now with this roof, there are not many exposed fasteners and there are not many holes through this roof. Actually, the panels are in excellent condition and are not prone to leaking. So the question is, why would you put a bunch of holes through a nice metal panel that's not going to leak? When you do that single ply recover, it actually adds the number of potential pathways for moisture to get into this building. Additionally, it changes the water weight distribution and the snow load distribution across the purlins and how they were designed. So to do a single ply overlay, this client would have actually had to do a structural upgrade to the interior of the building to be able to accept the weight changes with a single ply overlay. So the liquid applied restoration option was not only the most economical, but it's going to give them the best solution long term to stop their leaks by putting a flexible rubber membrane on all of those seams that have heavy movement and are prone to leaking on these types of roofs. So we'll show you the project start to finish. Again, these are the most problematic spots on these roofs, is that eventually the sealant that was original wears down and water is able to migrate in. The neoprene washers on the fasteners wear down as well. And so what we're going to do is put a very thick 100 dry mil layer of rubber up over top of this seam, which I'll show you.
So we've been showing you details from a particular project that we're involved with currently. And today I just want to walk through exactly what kind of options are commonly considered with this type of metal roof and what factors weigh the decision making when it comes to choosing between those options. So here we have a simple crude drawing of a trapezoidal standing seam metal roof and kind of the detail on how that's assembled, and then we'll walk through the different options that the client was able to consider when it came to fixing this worn out trapezoidal metal roof that they had. As you can see here, the detail we're showing is the primary horizontal seam overlaps where the majority of leaks occur with this type of metal roof system. With this type of metal roof system, there are not many exposed fasteners, which reduces the likelihood of it leaking and reduces the number of leak spots. There are also not many seams where water can find its way in. The vertical seams on these roofs typically will last decades and decades without any moisture intrusion because of how they're designed. This does show too how the metal panels are clipped and then mechanically attached to the purlins of the metal building. And so we're going to walk through some of the options that the client considered and kind of the factors that make a difference with each of those. So obviously, when it comes to an existing metal roof, you can always consider a complete replacement. That would involve removing the entire metal panel roof system, which in this case, this one's insulated on the bottom side with hanging fiberglass bat insulation. Remove all of that entirely and replace it. Now, this being a food production company, and specifically this roof being over a final bagging facility where it's extremely important that all of the food inside and everything is food safe and not contaminated. So exposing the building entirely to the elements by removing the metal roof and then going through the process of reinstalling a new one is not only extremely disruptive, but it's going to be the most expensive option that they have. So that was really kind of off the table. The second option that they could look at is doing a metal retrofit. So that would be going over, leaving the metal roof in place, going over it with another metal roof system. So what they typically do with that is that will be fastened into the purlins, into the structural bar joists of the existing metal building to secure it down. So you're kind of just going metal over metal. That can be a very successful system. Obviously, then you will have to address maintenance and potential leak concerns with the new metal roof that goes over the old at some point. But it is a fairly decent option that can be considered. The reason why sometimes it is taken off the table is because of the cost. It is one of the more expensive options that can be considered. And again, other items have to be looked at to make sure that issues from condensation between the two metal roof layers is not a concern. Here in the Midwest, where we have very hot and humid summers, very dry and frigid cold winters, condensation dew points is something that always has to be planned and designed for, and doing a metal over metal retrofit, that does have to be taken into consideration. So the client did not want to consider a metal retrofit because one of the costs too, it would require fastening into the purlins, and doing so would create debris that would fall into the facility and could affect the bagging operations and could affect the food safety at the plant. So then the third option, the one that was being seriously considered, was a single-ply overlay. Now what this would involve is rolling out a prefabricated TPO or PVC white single-ply membrane and mechanically attaching it over the existing roof. Now a few things to point out with this. With this existing metal roof, especially with trapezoidal panels, as I mentioned before, there are not many areas where these roofs leak. The panels themselves are typically in excellent condition. The only thing they are susceptible to is corrosion, and so that has to be planned for. But otherwise, the panel itself is in great condition, and unless it's damaged somehow, which would take a serious effort, it's not going to leak. And a single-ply overlay would require putting thousands and thousands of new holes through this existing metal roof. So as I said, not many exposed fasteners, not many seams. By adding a single ply to it, the first and foremost thing I want to discuss is you are actually drastically increasing the number of pathways for moisture to get into the building through the existing metal roof, because you are penetrating it with thousands of screws. In between the vertical ribs with a single ply, you have to fill that gap, fill that space, and use some sort of insulating material so you don't get condensation buildup between the metal and the new single ply. So typically they use flute filler insulation to go between all the vertical ribs. That has to be fastened down. They can't fully adhere it here because of wind uplift concerns. So that has to get screwed into the metal panel. Now again, I do want to call out that an existing metal roof is not the same gauge, not the same strength, and not planned for structurally like a steel deck. A lot of times people will say, well, going over an existing metal roof is no different than going over a steel deck. It is completely different. And those two things should not be considered the same. So you have to fasten that insulation down, then the single ply is rolled out over the existing metal, and then that has to be fastened down as well. Now, for wind uplift concerns, everybody, pretty much the consensus is it needs to be mechanically attached to every single purlin to meet the wind load design, because that will change. So I want to walk through a few things here. Some of the factors that have to be considered when looking at these options. So one is obviously water. What are the pathways for water to get in? So with a single ply overlay, that water can get in through penetration points, wherever that sheet ends, potentially a failed seam or a miswelded seam. Water can find its way there, and then through all the new fasteners. But the other thing I want to mention with water is the weight of water. Anytime it rains, that water temporarily being on the roof during the rain adds weight to the structure. With an existing metal roof, that water is channeled between the vertical ribs. After you do a single ply overlay, you're changing the entire profile of the roof, and you're changing the entire water weight distribution load across the roof. So now, instead of that water being channeled between the ribs and the purlins and the structural metal roof, or the structural metal building underneath being designed for this type of roof in this type of profile, now you're making it completely flat, so that water is going across the top of the vertical ribs for one, and it's changing the weight distribution across the purlins and across the entire structure. So if you look into this further, you'll see that it does make a huge difference. And so specifically with this facility, they hired a structural engineer to come in and take a look, run calculations, look at the existing building, look at the existing roof, and determine whether a single ply overlay would work without needing to do any upgrades to the structures. And they found, the engineers determined that the structure would have to be upgraded in order to take the change in water weight distribution with a single ply overlay. So now all of a sudden, there wasn't just the cost of doing the flute fill and a new membrane rolled out over top, but now there's the cost of doing a structural upgrade, which is very disruptive to the operations and costly as well. And then you have wind. Again, we talked about how the wind going across this roof now is going to change when we make it completely flat. So the stress that wind puts on the purlins and the structure, because now not only is the metal panel attached to the purlin, but the single ply is attached, and insulation is attached to the purlin. So that wind force trying to suck that roof up, that amount of force and stress on the purlin and on the structure underneath is now different with the single ply overlay. So with these things, and then snow is another one I want to mention. So the weight of snow sitting on top of the existing metal roof, that weight distribution is going to change once you turn it into a flat single ply roof. So those three things change the structural capacity of the whole system and are really important concerns. And I want to just go back and say again, this type of roof does not need to have thousands and thousands of holes put through it. It's completely unnecessary to change it into a completely different type of roof system. This is not like going over a new steel deck. It has experienced degradation, oxidation, and corrosion. Then again, if we do a single ply, right now, these panels are not going to be, leaks are not going to be caused by hail. So a severe hail event could dent the metal panel and could cause some other issues, but it's not going to actually perforate or cause a leak in these panels, not typically. Once we put a single ply on there, we know that the average lifespan of a TPO or PVC and at what point it becomes a little more brittle and susceptible to hail strikes, the spider web cracking, and then all of a sudden we have water that can get in through hail damage on a single ply roof and can find its way through all of those new moisture pathways that we created by putting thousands of holes through the roof. So we're actually downgrading the roof in terms of its hail resistance by doing a single ply overlay. The cost though is more effective than option 1 and 2. So that's why a single ply overlay is often considered, and it's more of a conventional approach. And some of the higher quality single plies do have good lifespans to them. You can get a 20-year or 25-year warranty from those. Safety is another thing, and I put it last, but to an industrial facility and to a food production facility, safety is actually the most important thing. Safety during the project, but then safety after the project is done. With a single ply overlay, you're not only changing the profile of the roof, but you're changing the slip resistance of the roof. So we do know that smooth single plies like PVC and TPO are very slippery when wet, especially TPO. And so if that's put over a low slope, or this has somewhat of a decent fall to it compared to some of these other types of roofs, it does create a life safety issue and a potential fall hazard and just someone slipping and hitting their head on the wall or on a penetration or even just falling on a flat surface. So the slip resistance change that this brings is a downgrade in the safety of this current roof system that's there. So the other option that we have, number 4 here, is a liquid applied membrane. So this is sort of a hybrid between option 5, which we'll go to, and option 3. So a single ply requires mechanical attachment. A liquid applied membrane is going to be applied thicker than a single ply. So you're putting a new membrane over the roof and you're not mechanically attaching it. It's fully adhered. So what you're doing is you're covering up the conventional leak points in this trapezoidal metal roof, and that's going to be the seams. So we're going to bury these seams with 100 dry mils of a liquid applied membrane or rubber. So this is obviously what the client chose, and commonly what happens on these roofs is most of your movement that occurs is going to be at these horizontal seams as the structure expands and contracts. Especially the sun goes down, sun goes up, it changes the heat load and the building moves. And so this movement that occurs here requires a product that has flexibility and strength and the ability to withstand that expansion and contraction. And so the client chose to use the Triton liquid applied rubber so that it's able to go over these horizontal seams, go over the limited amount of exposed fasteners that it has to create that thick, durable, flexible, waterproofing membrane over that. And then we also use the rubber as an anti-corrosive lining over the entire metal roof so that it will not allow any more oxidation because the rubber is impermeable. It won't allow any oxidation or corrosion of the metal panel. So that was another important thing for them. So again, it bridged the gap of having a fully adhered coating, but having the performance of a thick, durable, flexible single ply, but at a much more cost-effective price, because we didn't have to worry about the structural upgrades. We're not changing the snow load. We're not changing the water weight distribution load. We're not changing the wind uplift dynamics of this roof. And actually, we're improving its resistance to hail with the rubber, because the rubber has very high severe hail resistance to it. And so we're actually adding some value in that regard. Again, it's very economical. The lifespan is not just the initial 20-year warranty period that they're going to receive, but with this system, with the reflective top coat that you see going on top, that now is turned into a renewable, sustainable system. So at the end of the initial warranty term, a contractor can come back, the client can have them just reapply that sacrificial top coat, that wear layer, the white, and extend that warranty another 10 years, and they can do that indefinitely. So now they have a perpetually renewable roof system. So the lifespan is not just the initial period, but they can actually make this roof last for generations. Whereas if you go with a metal retrofit or a single ply overlay, in the future at some point you will have to redo that upfront life cycle cost. So the overall lifespan is longer with the liquid applied system, and it's also a renewable lifespan. Safety, let's go back to that. So during installation, this system is non-toxic and has no VOCs. So in terms of it being safe for the applicator, it is. In terms of being safe for anyone inside the building, it is. In terms of it being safe, those odors that are airborne for anything with the food processing, it's completely safe and non-toxic. And actually, something like the catalyst, for example, is even a food grade catalyst that's used. With the single ply overlay, one other thing I was going to mention is that attaching through the purlins does create that, again, that potential for debris. So what typically they would require is a temporary drop-down ceiling to catch any debris that would be a result from the mechanical attachment. Safety, the other point after the project, is that the Triton system has a slip-resistant surface. So not only is the rubber slip-resistant, but the Triton Curl 2K top coat that you see going on top is also slip-resistant. So we're actually adding value in terms of making it a safer roof for workers to walk on after the roof is complete, and that's extremely important. So it leads me to the final option they had, which is the cheapest option on here, would be to just do a traditional coating system, which would be silicone, acrylic, SEBS coating. There are obviously others that can be considered as well, but these are the main ones I want to talk about. These are usually applied thin. They're going to fabric reinforce all of the seams because the products don't have the strength and flexibility to withstand that expansion and contraction. So instead, they eliminate the elongation, embed polyester fabric, and rely on the strength of fabric to be able to withstand that. And as you'll see in these videos, that fabric, what often happens with this movement is it will either move within the coating and then create a deficiency for water to get in, or the fabric will split because the metal roof structural movements are stronger than the strength of that fabric. So that's why we want to have that flexibility, and that that expansion and contraction resistance is really important. The other thing with them as well, silicone safety, that rule it off the table right away. Silicone is probably the most slippery surface that can be put on an existing roof out of all of these. So when it's wet, it becomes a huge liability for the client. So silicone is kind of ruled out just for that factor. That, and once you put silicone on, it's the only thing you can put on this roof. You can only repair it with silicone, you can only fix it with silicone and recoat it. So then you're tied to it. So if it splits on the seams, you're stuck just putting on more unless you want to actually replace the entire roof. That, and it tends to yellow and have high dirt pickup. So in an industrial facility, the silicone roofs will really grab that dirt and those contaminants in the air, and it'll lose that reflectivity and that thermal shock reduction on a metal roof quickly. Acrylic is what we use as the top coat, but we don't use it as the primary waterproofing material. So if a traditional acrylic system is used, where they reinforce the seams with acrylic and fabric, that's permeable. So water can still go through that, it can hold itself in there, and it can still oxidize the existing. So it's the most cost effective out of all of these, but it's going to have the highest maintenance costs, repair costs, and it'll become a roof that has to be continually kind of limped along, as you can see from some of the documentation they're showing you. Again, with this one, I referenced some of the other videos that we've published to explain the differences between the different roof coatings. SEBS, that one was not possible in here just because of the odor. It's a solvent-borne product. The airborne odor, they would have had to shut down this particular facility while the product was being applied, and just the environmental department with the client would never have allowed a SEBS product to be put on this roof. That and SEBS does tend to chalk, and so that washing off of the SEBS chalky material, which is not an environmentally friendly material, that getting into the water system there at the plant is also something that they did not want to have occur. So with all of this considered, these were the two primary options that were being looked at by this client: the single-ply overlay and the Triton liquid applied waterproofing system. The client chose the liquid applied waterproofing system. It was the most cost effective for them. They saved a lot of money compared to option 1, 2, and 3. It was non-disruptive. It wasn't intrusive. It wasn't a burden on their operations at all. It was completely non-toxic and safe during installation. And now it has actually increased the safety factor of this roof now that it's complete, and they've increased their resistance to hail. They've put a thick, durable, flexible waterproofing membrane over any of the potential leak spots. All of the exposed fasteners, all of the seams, the penetrations, even the block wall that transitions up to a TPO roof, and you'll see in these clips the TPO roof had cracked and had split as it became brittle with time and was taking in water. So that was fully recovered with a new layer of 80 mil dry Tritoflex 2K rubber, and then the 2K acrylic was put on top of that. So that was fully recovered with a new seamless membrane, and that was transitioned down the block wall, and the entire metal roof was restored. So if you have any more questions on this, we'd be happy to answer them. Again, feel free to look at our other videos, which contain a lot of educational information. But this client was very happy with the end result, and now they have a sustainable, safe roof for generations.